Hey guys, it's Teresa here with Talking Sense. We have got an interesting topic, I think, today. If you're watching us online, you'll see we have an unusual guest. This is Ryan Evans with Wayfinder Insurance, and I'm not talking about your appearance. I mean that you're not normally on the show. Again, Ryan is with Wayfinder Insurance. He is an independent insurance broker. We joked about it last time that if you can buy it, he can insure it. So that's his role. We met previously to talk about how the insurance industry is changing in general, and you taught me a ton. So we're going to be doing a mini series. We're going to do 3 episodes in a row talking about other insurance stories and maybe some cautionary tales and some things that people need to know for our listeners. And I felt like you would be the best resource for that. So thank you for your time this morning coming in to do this.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
So today we're calling this episode Tales from the Insurance Broker's Crypt. And I know I named this and you're just stuck with it. But
fun.
I know when we've talked before, you've shared some of them horror stories, some of them stories where you got a big win for a client or where you helped someone avoid a risk that they would have been exposed to, which really is your biggest job. I find it interesting that in our industry, your industry, we all have these times where either we meet someone after something horrible has happened or we meet them before and we get to help them avoid it.
Right.
So, how long have you been in the industry? Just give us kind of a quick overview.
Oh, yeah. So the funny story is I started in the insurance business in college to help pay for college. It was not what I was supposed to do. I was going to grow up to be a football coach like every other football player was going to do. And it just kind of happened that I fell in love with insurance. I fell in love with staying in the people business. But yeah, so that was in 2009. So yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So 15 years. I've been very fortunate to be in the insurance business because, again, I always tell people you're in the people business and insurance is just what I do. So it's been a blessing for sure.
Good. So our first story is actually a cautionary tale. And this is talking about the importance of having an official home inspection.
Right.
So when we were talking, you have someone who came to you. They had a friend who was a contractor do their inspection as like a favor and bought a house. But then there was a life circumstance change and they needed to sell it quickly. So tell me what happened next.
Yeah. So just like you said, it was a case that they were looking to save money on, the cost of the home inspection. And ultimately, we kind of came to the client after the transaction had been done, I guess you would say. And it really spotlights something that a lot of people don't realize on insurance and the fact that the claim is handled on a per occurrence basis. So I don't remember the exact details, but let's just say the client had the house for 5 months after their circumstance changed. And then they wanted to sell the house and they were actually in a good position to sell the house. In that short period of time, they'd already built up quite a bit of equity, which again, is something that you love to see in your position. Sadly, with the home inspection not being done, something came to light with the new home inspection when the new buyers took place. So the new buyer brought in, which oddly enough was another one of my clients. So we got it from both sides. It was a very interesting story. And the home inspector noticed there was a lot of hail damage on the roof. Well, naturally, you have homeowners insurance, right? That should be covered. Sadly, we filed the claim. Adjuster came out. Adjuster 100% agreed the roof had been demolished by hail. The unfortunate part is we couldn't track any data back to a storm happening in that area within the time that they had owned the house.
So when you're making a claim, they have to be able to say, okay, this event could have caused this. Even if it necessarily didn't, there has to have been a hail event during that period of time that you've had that policy in place. Okay.
So basically, the initial claim got denied, and that's whenever we got involved. And I said, hey, let me talk to the adjuster, let me talk to the head of claims. And I was very fortunate. The head of claims was like, you know what, Ryan, I get it. Stuff like this happens. Get me pictures from the home inspection that shows that this roof was fine. We'll take care of it. We understand that the data could possibly be, not perfect.
Right.
Well, that's when we ran into the snag. There was no home inspection done.
So if they had done the home inspection, even though there had not been a documented hail event, the company would have covered it.
We would have had proof that there was a perfectly good roof when they bought the house, and they no longer had a perfectly good roof in the time period that we were the insurer, I guess you would say. And the sad part is, in that scenario, they were really excited about the equity they had built up. The majority of that got eaten up by having to pay for a new roof out of pocket.
And I think the key takeaway for me on this is to connect with your insurance broker during the home buying process, because there are pieces of things like this that you could have warned them, because they weren't your clients till after they'd already bought the house.
Correct.
So you could have been like, hey, make sure you have this, this, and this taken care of. You check these things because these can come up. And they could have possibly avoided this whole situation by paying a few $100 for a home inspection.
Absolutely. Well, and it kind of, it puts a spotlight on how claims are paid on a per occurrence basis, because in that exact same scenario, let's just say they were my clients for 2 to 3 years before that, and I had them with XYZ insurance. And then when they bought this new house, I had moved them to ABC insurance or whatever. The claim always goes back to the time of the occurrence. So it is actually possible that Teresa could have her home insured with a big national carrier and then switch her insurance to me. And then a year down the road, we realized there was damage, but we can't track the storm back. It could actually fall back on the previous insurance company because you were insured during that time period. So it is important to know it goes in a property claim event like that. It goes back to the time of the occurrence.
Let's say that had happened. You as my broker now, but weren't before. Would you be able to advocate for me with the previous provider in that situation?
Yeah. So, I mean, we kind of, when it comes to insurance policies, specifically homeowners insurance, we kind of all speak the same language. So in a lot of cases, it's going to be clear that it was during that policy term. And the beautiful part is, just like a lot of the other data tracking that we have in just the world today, we have really good data on storms. They can almost pinpoint where every lightning strikes to even determine whether it's a faulty lightning strike claim. So that is a huge blessing to have those resources available.
Got it. So that's our first one. The second one, we want to caution you about being careful of bad advice. Someone had called your office, they were your client, and said, hey, do I have full coverage? Which, by the way, we'll talk about full coverage kind of being a myth in our next episode. They'd gotten out of school. They were, starting their internship, stepping into taking care of their own coverage, and they wanted to drop their coverage to liability only because they had paid off their vehicle. They were trying to save some money, and you told them, think about it.
Yeah.
Tell me that one.
Well, and this is one of my favorite examples too, because, one of our favorite client experiences is the opportunity to get somebody that is truly open to hearing advice and is looking to absorb, any information that you give them. So this was an individual that had been on their parents' policy for years or on their family's policy, that they were basically not only graduating college, but entering their professional career. And in that time, we had an opportunity to really, we literally could go line by line through their coverage and be like, this is why you need this. This is why you need this. And ultimately, during that time period, we were able to put them in a great policy that was actually quite a bit more coverage than they were used to seeing, because that's the level of protection that they felt comfortable with. And more importantly, it kind of highlights a little bit of the myth of a lot of insurance is bought because somebody else told you to have it, I guess you would say.
Right.
So I'm financing this very expensive vehicle and the bank makes me have insurance on it. And sadly, a lot of people do learn, I go out and buy this really nice vehicle that maybe my insurance wasn't adequate enough, or I now need to go from liability only insurance to needing to add, more coverage to that policy to cover the loan. So in that particular scenario, we actually was able to take care of that insured and get them really set up exactly the way we felt like they wanted. We wanted, the advice that we gave them. And then they, a few months down the road, a family member was leaning on them and giving them their 2 cents. And we had a call that, hey, this is a 2009 car. They shouldn't have all this coverage. It's not worth that much anyway. These are things that we hear on a regular basis. Luckily, we were kind of able to say, hey, let's just leave it the way it is. It wasn't within 2 weeks of that insured ran into another vehicle. And it was a case where our client was driving down the road. Somebody else kind of pulled out in front of them. She had to slam on their brakes to keep from hitting them. And it was kind of one of those weird deals where you weren't going to be 100% sure whose fault it was. But what made it even worse, when the police officer got there, the people fled the scene. So my client is sitting there with a car that is damaged that she hit somebody with. And there's really no way of saying it's not my fault and to compare it to the other person's story, because we just have a damaged vehicle there. And again, this is one of those opportunities that we got to be on the front end of that. And some of our advice really played out well for us, because again, in this individual, we even had unlimited rental car coverage, which is almost becoming
a unicorn.
A bit of a unicorn. It's getting harder and harder to come by. She works one of those jobs that she can't just have her phone with her all the time. So when the body shop needs to call her and say your car's ready, whatever, she got off work well afterwards. So she was able to stay in a rental car longer. It was just a whole lot better process than it would have been ultimately. If she didn't have the coverage, she could have paid for every bit of that out of pocket.
Right, because with it being, if she'd gone with liability only, without them being able to claim that someone else was liable, she would have just had to pay for that to get fixed on her own, covering her own rental car. And that just, I think as an industry, the dynamics are changing. There's this like race to the bottom for fees and things like that, which we're going to talk about next. And so people are not really getting the coverage they think they have. They're not understanding their coverage. So having somebody to coach them through that, I think, is important. But let's talk about that race to the bottom. You know, people are seeing rates online or in commercials, and they wonder why theirs is higher. And, you know, my view is in some cases, you get what you pay for.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard the old saying that comparison is how they say it? Comparison's the enemy of happiness.
Yes.
So that's, you know, a very big example in life. But one of the craziest things that I see all the time is people comparing themselves on Facebook. And you have a 22-year-old asking why their premium is X. And then you have a 45-year-old that drives an old truck saying, well, my insurance is only this much. And then it starts this whole, you know, then all the industry experts get involved, you know, in a comment thread. And sadly, there's so many variables that's getting harder and harder to explain, you know, because we do such a great job of data tracking now. But ultimately, it usually helps consumers, right? If you drive well, you maintain your car, you have a good insurance score, which is, again, a reflection of your credit score in a lot of ways. You are rewarded for that. And so data is most people's friend, but unfortunately,
for some people,
if you don't take care of it, it can kind of come back to bite you a little bit.
Well, and one thing, you know, we have kind of the same thing happening in our industry. And I was talking with a client the other day about fees. They were very concerned about it. And I asked them, I said, you know, the account that you have is very inexpensive. Will they be reaching out to you to make sure you take your RMDs? Will they be checking with you to make sure your beneficiaries are up to date? Because you have daughters, their names may change if they get married or divorced. Will they do this? Will they do that? Will they do this? Will they do that? I had a similar situation where someone had bought homeowners insurance and they hadn't had it updated in a long time. Their house caught fire, burns down. They can't replace it because the policy had never been updated. They'd never been coached about, you know, since 2020, house prices have skyrocketed. To be able to build a home is much more expensive, almost double. So if your insurance hasn't been looked at, you could not have the coverage you think you do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's actually funny. I've got a statistic here that really surprises me. So now this isn't an Arkansas statistic. This is a national statistic. And it is sourced by the Home Builders Institute. And again, this is a national average, but the median house price in 2019 was $319,000. So again, they're not really specifying square footage or style of the house. Right. But in 2019 to 2022, that median price went from $319,000 to $454,000. It is almost impossible for an insurance company to catch up to that. I'm sure it's the same way in your business. You can only advise a client, you can only plan with the client for so much without the consumer taking a little bit of responsibility and just trying to be as knowledgeable as they can on what their own home is worth. So in that scenario, some companies, and again, I represent, you know, upwards of 30 insurance companies inside my agency. Some companies took a very dramatic stand and they said, hey, across the board, we're just going to increase everybody's coverage by 20%. Trying to catch up, to try to get a hedge on inflation. Some companies will do standard 3 to 4%, but there are still a lot of traditional companies out there that they don't increase their values.
They don't automatically do it. You have to request an increase.
Correct. You can do that based on what it would cost to replace your home, but they don't automatically do it inside the policy. And sadly, inflation does happen, and it's always going to cost more and more to rebuild a house unless something dramatic happens, obviously. But it's one of those things you still need to, and one thing that's always important too, and certain things like the tornadoes last year put a huge spotlight on this. The beautiful part is your land can't burn down. It can't get blown away by a tornado. So it's very important to remember to compare replacement costs, what it costs to replace your home, and not market value.
Yes.
And those are some of the things that kind of get highlighted in these hard times.
And the other thing you had highlighted, we're getting tight on time, so I'll make sure we get through this. There was someone who was comparing you to another company they found online. And when you looked at the policies side by side, theirs had no flood coverage, no damage. This was a rental property, no damage if the renters damaged the household having a party, or no coverage if there was a water leak. So there were all these things that were just being excluded that weren't really obvious on the policy. So that just highlights the importance of, to me, having somebody, not just AI, making decisions for you. And I want to give you a chance to give your final thoughts before we have to cut out here in just a second.
So, and going back to that example, a guy was purchasing an investment property, and I was very fortunate that he trusted me enough to let me take a look at it. He had already bought the policy, and I was just surprised because this was a company that I compete with on a regular basis. I was really, they were almost 35% less than we were. We don't see that a lot with the options that we have. And I was able to take a look at it, and I was able to literally go down to like page 13, and I'm looking on coverages that are excluded. And I was shocked. It was a learning experience for me even. But on this particular policy that he purchased, and again, this was from a large national carrier that has a great reputation, in a nutshell, it excluded everything that a tenant could do to that property. Again, this was an investment property other than if the tenant burned the house down. And I actually was very fortunate to just be able to highlight all those things. And I sent it back to him and I said, you're the only one that can tell me whether or not those coverages are important to you. And he was floored.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important, and again, unfortunately, a lot of people have found out in these times during storm season that they learn, but insurance policies are not created equal, and even more so in today's times than they were, 10 years ago. And during a storm or during a fire is not the time you want to learn it, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with me today, Ryan. If you like today's content and you'd want more, we're going to be here for 2 more weeks talking about insurance and different topics that you need to know about to protect your financial independence journey. Thank you so much. Have a great week. Thanks for listening to Talking Sense. And if you like what you hear, make sure and subscribe to the podcast to get all the newest episodes. The Jim Wealth team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or by calling our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. And while we like to have fun here, we're also financial advisors, and that means disclosures. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and Jim Wealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.